Welcome to the Gumption Podcast, hosted by seasoned commercial real estate developer and co-founder of Gumption, Ward Neely. Every episode, he interviews commercial real estate veterans on the cutting edge of the industry for their story, insights, and wisdom. Today, we're joined by Jeff Enck, first vice president of Matthews Real Estate. Jeff is an industry thought leader and pioneer of Unanchored strip center sales. The Unanchored retail center is arguably one of the hottest property types in all of CRE right now, and Jeff is the expert. Enjoy the show.
So I'm here with Jeff Enck, good friend. We've met, maybe 5 years ago?
Yep, sounds about right.
Yeah, I think we got connected through Kyle and Pierce. I'd known Pierce since I got in the business. But appreciate you joining us today and helping us walk through the first ever podcast.
Yeah, my first ever too. It's an honor. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Well, we'll jump right in. So I guess just start, kind of give us your background, where you're from, all that stuff, and then kind of ease into how you got into real estate.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in St. Simons Island, Georgia, and went to college at University of Georgia. And after school, I got my first gig was a sales position with a carpet company. So I got a territory working the Gulf Coast of Florida, like Tampa down to Naples, and then I got promoted, went to Austin, Texas for a little bit. And after about 4 years, I was kind of getting a little homesick for Georgia. Most of my friends had graduated from Georgia or around the Georgia area, were living in Atlanta. So I was kind of ready for the next phase of life. So I put several different things into the hopper as far as my decision-making process and came up with commercial real estate for better or for worse, for whatever reason. And so I came to Atlanta and I got the Book of Lists out. If anybody remembers the Book of Lists, is that still a thing?
I think it was when I first got into the business, but I think they were forcing me to do all the old school things just to learn, like also the scratch off arrows and the rub on stars and stuff for maps.
Oh, right.
I think that's
way old school.
I think it was hazing more than it was education, but
right. So I got the Book of Lists out and went through the top 25 real estate brokerage companies of Atlanta, and I went through the whole list, met with a bunch of people, and got on with a national company in about 1999. So just been running with that ever since.
So who'd you start with?
So I started with Marcus and Millichap.
Okay.
Yep, started with Marcus and Millichap, and it was a great experience. Some really great people. Particularly at the time, there was some great mentors there and some great people that I was able to work with. But it was interesting. So I had kind of fancied myself as, in the 90s, office was really like glamorous and really cool, and like, people dressed up really well, so you see guys with like ties and like the suspenders back in the day.
Oh yeah.
And those were the guys that were in like the big, corporate office type stuff. And I was like, that's super cool. That's really what I'd like to do. So I pictured myself doing that. And so my boss and mentor at the time, his name was Rick Ross.
Oh, nice. Sounds familiar.
I don't know if you remember Rick Ross. Rick Ross has been around Atlanta for a long time. Great guy. But he ran the office together with Emery Shane at the time, who was another great mentor. But Rick kind of took me under his wing, and he was a retail guy. He developed shopping centers and had done a lot of work in the retail space. So he kind of took me under his wing. He's like, took me into the office and goes, okay, today's decision day. You're going to sell shopping centers in Gwinnett County.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, shopping centers? Like, I don't want to sell shopping centers. I want to do big office buildings. And so anyway, he talked me into it, and so that's how I got into retail, 1999, and just pretty much it's evolved a little bit up and down and sideways, and to where it is now. But that was the start, with some changes along the way.
Yeah. So where'd you go from Marcus?
So Marcus, after Marcus and Millichap, there was so Emery Shane was also leading the office at Marcus and Millichap, and at 2002, I think, or 2001, he split off and started his own firm called Shane investment property group. So I went over with Emory in 2002 and stayed there for really until up to a few years ago when he sold the company. Was with Shane. That was a boutique shop, and we specialized really mostly in leased investments. We did some office, but at the firm, but I was only in retail.
Okay. And then that's when you got connected with Kyle and Pierce.
Yeah, so Kyle Stonis and I have known each other for a really long time, and he actually approached me about coming to work with him and to partner with him back in probably, 2010, and it was coming out of the recession. Things were rough, and we can get into more about the recession, how that played out for a lot of people, including me, but I just wasn't in position to make a move at the time. That was when he met Pierce.
Yeah.
So it all worked out. Kyle met Pierce Mason. They partnered together, and then full circle, about 2 years ago, Pierce and Kyle and I have all partnered together.
Nice.
Yep.
Yeah, so Pierce was one of the early guys I met when I was working at SRS. And I guess, well, actually, I think we met when I was still at Shopping Center Group. But I got in like 2010, so there really weren't a lot of young guys getting in there. And so that early on, at least with kind of that Southeastern retail, if you were under 35 years old in 2010, for the most part, I feel like we all knew each other.
Yeah, right.
And then I ended up at SRS and connected there. So, and then you guys, I know, really do a lot of different product types, but I know kind of your specialty and your focus has been that unanchored strip space, which of course is, the office of the 80s and 90s. Everybody wants it. You might not have to wear the suspenders.
Yeah, I can be a little more casual.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the generation, the age, or the 2024 is a little easier to be a little more relaxed.
Yeah, well, here I am in my T-shirt, which has always been a theme. But yeah, let's kind of jump into that. Obviously, in the last 3 years, it's as big a buzzword as any in the industry. So, did it come out right out of the gate, early on? Hey, this is what I want to do, or was it like an evolving thing that you identified and said, hey, I want to be a pro at this? Because you have been kind of a thought leader in the space for a while now, since well before everybody was talking about it.
Yeah, so I think the goal was, eventually to kind of evolve and move up and sell, large grocery centers and power centers, and that was kind of the projected evolution. And so, we were kind of growing that way at Shane. I think in, 2006 or so, we sold a big center for like $40 million that had LA Fitness and, if you remember some of these tenants, H.H. Gregg, and it had an Office Depot, and that was kind of a really big deal in Windward Parkway. So that was like, okay, this is my launching point. Now I'm really going to get into the big stuff. So a lot of things happened between then and now, but really, a couple things were, we were working a lot of these secondary markets where you have, like a local or regional grocery store, and they're in these 5-year term phases, and at any given point there could be 2 or 3 years left on like a Rose's lease or like a Big Lots lease. Obviously Big Lots is different now, but so what became really difficult for me to kind of wrap my mind around, maybe I'm just a very simple person, but like you got a big space of 40,000 feet or 20,000 feet or whatever it may be, and if it's got 2 or 3 years left, like it's almost impossible to sell. I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Right.
Because you got to price it really well, and you got to be able to get store sales, and these tenants don't all report sales, so you're trying to figure out, okay, I can get it listed, but how am I going to sell it? So after banging my head against the wall on a few of those and I just didn't really ramp into the institutional world for whatever reason. I think we just didn't have the manpower at the boutique shop at Shane at the time to capture that. So I was like, you know what? These strip centers are great because they're so straightforward, in many respects. I mean, there's a lot of detail to them, not to say that they're very easy. But if you have a strip center and it's got, 10 tenants, and all your spaces are between 1,500 and 3,000 or 4,000, like it's kind of like retail apartments.
Right.
You lose one tenant, great. now you get to reset your rents to the current market levels
Right.
and insert a new tenant. Maybe you put in some TI. And a lot of these are local tenants, which is like, people have taken a while to figure this out. Like, it's been credit. Everybody's wanted credit. And now, I think COVID really shined the light on this, but we've kind of known it for a while. It's like, these local tenants, they might have 2 or 3 locations, maybe one. This one location could be their entire livelihood.
Yeah.
So they're going to fight, and they're going to work hard to make it work. And if they can't work, they got to figure out something else to do. Like, they've lost their job, they've lost all their income. So from that standpoint, we figured out that, not figured out, I think it's well known that, there's pretty good security in that. So having gone through that process and figuring that out and realizing that if you have good real estate, and if you have easy to lease spaces, then that's a really desirable product type.
Yeah, that's your stability, really.
Yeah, that's the stability. And so that became my focus, and that was, so really, back to the original focus, which was strip centers in Gwinnett County. Now it's like we're working a larger geographical area, but that's the same MO.
Right. Yeah, and I would imagine, so many of those centers have been built 20, 30 years ago, but the block is still the block. You got to replace a roof every once in a while, but, you can't build it for what most of these people built it for 20 years ago and have sold it 3 times over.
Yep.
I had a Badcock furniture deal, and I've got a group of people that I always kind of bounce big decisions off of, and I had the opportunity to backfill it with an independent furniture operator, and then had some bigger, more credit tenants kind of floating out there that were showing interest. And I went to a mentor of mine. I was like, hey, where do I go with this thing? And this is I don't know how long he's been in the business, 35, 40 years. He's always been a credit developer, credit landlord, and he's like, I'm done with that. He said, go link up with a guy that's the independent guy whose kid's college fund is tied to the success of that business.
Yep.
Because he's not going to use bankruptcy, loopholes or restructuring to screw you. And if you need somebody or you need to work something out with an independent guy, you can meet them face to face. You can talk through it. You can build a relationship. But I feel like relationships on the credit side of things really have disappeared, not just in the landlord-tenant relationship, but in the tenant-rep-tenant relationship, the loyalty that existed, I think, when I got into the business has somewhat disappeared. Maybe that's just my observation.
Interesting, yeah.
It's just being on the other side of it now. I have tenants call me, and then I'll have one broker call saying they're representing these guys, and then another broker call saying they're representing these guys. Whereas in the day, it was, hey, Bill has this account, and you need to talk to Bill.
Right.
Now it's like, I guess I just go with whoever brought them first and, paper the deal first, but I really don't know.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's what's interesting about this whole dynamic. And, for the most part in the Southeast, with the exception of a few emerging markets, the best real estate has been taken for years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and
definitely.
So, and that's it. It's this multi-tenant stuff that was built in the 80s, 70s, maybe 60s. And so why plow it over and rebuild for twice the cost?
Yeah, right.
When you can paint it, you can redo the landscaping, you can update the signage, and, probably get twice the return. So,
yeah. Yep.
Well, cool. So you mentioned earlier mentors. I'm a big fan. I'm not a smart guy. I've had all of my success is relying on the intelligence of others.
Yep.
So I'm really, really fond of the guy I called the other day, people that I've been able to trust. And so maybe kind of tell us about, those mentors, how they kind of helped you mold your career.
Yeah, I've had some good ones. I mentioned Rick Ross, and he was a great friend and a good mentor. And then really, Emery Shane has probably been my biggest influence on my business career. and at some levels on a personal level too. But he's really experienced, and I would agree with you. Like I just try to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, people who are better than me, and then pick up whatever I can pick up. And then at some point, I'm as good as them, or at least maybe I've picked up enough from enough people that I'm maybe better than some people, hopefully. But Emery Shane was a great mentor, and he would say his famous line was he would say that he taught me everything that I know, but not everything that he knows.
Right.
If he's talking to a client competing against me, I'm sure he would say that. But I learned a lot from him just about, really kind of some of the nuanced part of the business, aside from, the blocking and tackling of making the calls and taking the meetings and getting out there and knowing your market. But he really had a smooth way with his words that I tried to mimic a little bit, but never came close to. He's like Cary Grant or something, and I could never live up, but he was a great one. He's probably my most influential of all.
Yeah. It's funny because, you mentioned blocking and tackling. I always relate to sports. I think one thing I like about real estate is there's kind of a bunch of unwritten rules, that maybe don't exist, like a code of honor that doesn't exist in every industry. And sometimes having those mentors to kind of walk you through hey, you never railroad another guy's development in a planning meeting and stuff like that.
Yep.
I think having somebody who's been through it and knows how to walk through, as a good friend of mine says, there's crap in the road all the time. You got to know when to step in it and when to step over it. And
right.
Most of the time it's you step over it.
Uh-huh.
And having those mentors kind of, helps you navigate all that stuff, especially early in your career where it's like, it really is make or break.
Yeah.
You make a wrong decision, especially on the development side or relationship wise. Uh-huh. It's easy to get labeled by who you're associating with. So having good ones early on,
Yeah. The thing with Matthews that's been so great too is, a lot of these guys are really like leveled up beyond what a lot of us consider like possible. So like there are some really, really high achievers at this firm. And Kyle Matthews is a great thought leader and pioneer and really just just kind of a disruptor for the whole industry right now. So we really like that about Matthews. And the other flip side of that is now I get to be a mentor to a lot of these, younger up-and-comers that have lots of talent that just need to be polished and need to be guided a little bit to be able to give back. So the setup of the firm is really great to get both sides of that.
Yeah, I would think that's like super rewarding.
It's crazy fun. Like we have, so Ashley Liguri works with us on our team, and we're mentoring her, and she's closed like 3 deals in a row and just closed one, as of, I don't know when this will be out, but she closed it yesterday. So she closed another one yesterday. So it's fun just watching, like you're getting your reps, you're getting some closings, like you're getting your business going. It's fun to watch, and just, she's still got that nervousness, like where's my next deal coming from, which I guess maybe that never goes away.
No, it hasn't for me in 15 years.
Maybe you feel a little more comfortable, you can sleep at night, but I don't think she's sleeping at night yet. But
yeah.
But we've got a couple others that are doing well. Drew and then Boris Kopolov is doing well, so they're up and comers. We're excited to see them reach the next level too.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know Kyle at all, but have followed his content and everything else. And you're right. It really is a top-down mentality. And like, I feel like I work a lot, and then I'll watch something that he puts out. I'm like, man, I'm such a slacker.
Yeah. Have you seen Dave Harrington, any of his stuff?
Yeah, I've been following a lot of that. Really, all of their upper leadership. I follow him on LinkedIn, so I've enjoyed keeping up with it. But
Dave Harrington, he's the president of Matthews, and he is like energy like I've never seen before in my life. And like I'm just like, okay, how do I become more like Dave? Like this is like something to really aspire to. Like he posts on LinkedIn, I just started running, and then next thing you know, it's like, okay, 100 days in, I ran 10 miles, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like.
Yeah.
That's like, there's another level that all these guys are hitting, whether it's working out or hitting the gym or cold calls or closing. So it's Matthews is a place for big achievers. So it's fun to be around.
Yeah. Well, it's, the whole iron sharpens iron.
Oh, yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
And this is a super competitive world. Real estate is.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily the cutthroat world that it used to be, but people still want to win. It's super competitive from that perspective. And, when you see somebody showing up at the office at 5 a.m. and then it's, made aware to the entire company that this guy's showing up at 5.
Yeah.
Somebody's showing up at 4:55 the next day. And then it
Right.
just keeps running.
Yep.
I don't know that I could keep up with all that, but
Yeah, that's the old kind of Kobe Bryant mentality. Like, this guy's going to know that I'm going to outwork him no matter what. you know?
right. Well, and I guess genetically that's ingrained in Kyle Matthews, right? It's a
Yeah.
family of high achieving, high performance people, and unfortunately for my kids, I hope they get it from some other place in life. They're not going to be an athlete, and they're probably not going to be some high achiever. So hopefully somebody influences them along.
No, I'm sure you're doing great things with Gumption and like what you've done. I think what you're doing is exciting, and they'll have plenty to look up to. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I ask everybody biggest mistake in real estate. I know I've made a few. I could go in, but I think a lot of the best lessons are learned from mistakes, and learning from others people's mistakes.
Yeah, I saw that on the question list and was seeing this is kind of a potential jugular question here, like deciding how honestly I wanted to answer that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, let's see. 2006, I bought a shopping center. This was going to be my first deal, and I was actually, the idea was like, okay, become shopping center owner, buy a bunch of deals. There were a lot of upside deals around in secondary markets that you could pick up on the cheap. And so I was kind of modeling myself after a client of mine that I knew that had done incredibly well. So he sort of groomed me and helped me into this deal. And his name was Fritz McPhail. If you know Fritz, he's with Blue Ridge Capital. He owns, he has amassed a really nice portfolio of shopping centers, mostly secondary markets. So I was kind of modeling myself, okay, like, all right, I'm going to just do what he did. And I bought this shopping center. It was 45,000 square feet, had a dark buy low, still paying rent. And then there was a ground lease on the property that I was going to eventually at some point have the opportunity to pick up. So anyway, long story short, 2008 happened. Buy low had a couple of years left, so I was getting nice checks from buy low. I got a call from my lender, and this is when things were getting rough. Like, we were kind of battening down the hatches, like we weren't making deals at all. Like, the whole deal flow was cut off completely.
Yeah.
My lender calls, and he's like, hey, did you see Bilo file bankruptcy today? I'm like, no kidding. Is that right? So that kind of tumbled into a really bad real estate deal, which we eventually lost, which I lost personally to the bank. And we got out of it kind of with our skin, kind of not. The bank got out of it kind of with their skin, kind of not also.
Right.
But I think the worst mistake on that deal was, one, I think I was just I was having a good point in my career. Everybody was doing well in 05 and 06.
Sure.
So I was kind of cocky. Secondly, we didn't really stress test that deal. And that was the biggest mistake of my real estate career, is not stress testing that deal, because the ground lease is fine if you can get the land, which generally if you have a ground lease under a property, it can be problematic in some fashion. The biggest problem for that was the ground rent was pretty high. So I didn't have a lot of staying power once Bilo left, because that the ground rent that I had to pay, plus the mortgage, just like chopped out the cash flow, chopped out everything left in the bank really fast. So stress test, I didn't stress test that deal well enough.
Yeah.
So many mistakes made, but that was my biggest one by far.
In your defense, I think just being in the business in 06 and 07 and being aggressive was a mistake everybody made.
Yeah, I mean, I was in good company. I mean, I had friends of mine that had given deals back to the bank, like, and lots of clients that I had that knew that gave, how many deals went REO in 08, 09, 2010? Like, it was, my whole business as a broker from those 3 years were all 4 years were REO deals.
Oh, yeah.
So lots of people lost deals. I, kicked myself for should have known better on that deal. But yeah, we were in good company. Maybe.
Oh, yeah. It's being on the tenant rep side, it was always figuring out who the landlord rep was on certain assets. But half the time, the ownership was Wells or Regions or whoever else.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, I got to figure out who runs their real estate department.
Yeah.
So, so along those lines, we've just, I don't want to say come out of a slowdown, but I think there's optimism that we're potentially turning a corner. Every year we go to ICSC, there's always some buzzword. And last year I heard it over and over again, which is survive to 25.
Yep.
I think every buzzword I've ever heard at ICSC ended up being wrong. Except for this one seems to be, at least from what we're seeing, what I'm seeing. I know I'm slightly insulated. But yeah, just thoughts on kind of where we're headed next 12 to 18 months, commercial real estate as a whole. We can skip apartments and office.
Yep.
But yeah, retail, industrial, medical office, I think, all that kind of, where do you think things are headed? Are we out of the woods yet? All that stuff.
Yeah, I think we're in a kind of really unique spot. And maybe it's not that unique, as I guess Ray Dalio would say, it's just another one of those like that you've seen before, just maybe packaged a little bit differently. But I think what's interesting is like the interest rates were so low, obviously, and then caused the inflationary pressures that made interest rates go up. So now we've been sitting in this kind of stagnation period for transactions where it's been really tough to make deals for a couple of years because of the interest rates being so high. And not necessarily because the interest rates are necessarily so high on their own, but comparatively speaking, they're high. And the comparison matters because you have people that still have those loans that are 3.5%.
Right.
So those people aren't selling because if they sell their property, they've also sold their loan, and they have to get a new loan that's going to be, well, now at this point, something with a 6 on it. Maybe it's low 6s, maybe it's upper 6s, depending on what kind of product it is. But I think what's interesting more so really to where the market's going is it's requiring an economic downturn to get the interest rates to flip in our direction. And that's not like the best news. Like usually when, like the best years are when you're coming out of the recession and like you start to ramp up, you have those low interest rates and all of a sudden, the momentum of the economy starts like propelling everything forward. So I think 2025 is going to actually be pretty good, but I think there's like kind of a window. Been talking a lot about this window that we're seeing, and the window is like, okay, interest rates are going to come down. I mean, that's pretty much everybody would be in agreement on that.
Sure.
But then simultaneously, I think we're going to see, the reason for that is the economy is faltering in a lot of respects. You're seeing, tenants like, is Badcock on the list, big lots, Cons. I saw another one today. I'm trying to remember on LinkedIn that are going bankrupt or closing lots of stores. So you're kind of seeing this backdrop of, okay, we've been wanting interest rates to go down, and they are, but now we've got store closings and some other rumblings in the economy. So I feel like it may get a little dicey out there, but until it does, that's where the window is. So I think you got a window, and maybe it's, I don't know, through third quarter next year, or maybe if we have a real recession, then I think you could have kind of a blip up in 2025 for real estate transactions. It could get a little rougher just depending on where the economy goes in 2026. But then I think, once we fully come out of the recession, if we, that's still like the debate, right? I'm kind of going off on tangents here, but like, okay, is it going to be like a quasi soft landing? Are we going to have a real recession? Real recession is what, 2 quarters of negative growth, but it could be 3, it could be 4. You don't know how bad it gets. So I think 2025 will be pretty good, but I'm not sure what the staying power will be. We'll have to see. If the economy rebounds, then I think we'll be in great shape.
Yeah.
Which what we're hoping for is a perfect storm for this all to,
sure, for the ones that have been hanging on for the last 18 months. And this is more of an observation of mine, but I love your thoughts on it. So we're in this really weird spot from a retail real estate perspective where almost my entire career, the investment grade pricing of retail strip centers always exceeded the cost value, the cost to buy and build. And there's a weird inversion going on right now where costs have skyrocketed, interest has skyrocketed, material costs have skyrocketed, trade costs have skyrocketed, insurance, taxes, everything. Yeah. And so we're in this weird spot where you can actually buy an asset at a market cap rate substantially less than it costs to build. How do you think that affects things moving forward, from a transactional perspective, but also a new development perspective, or does it?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, that's a part of the world that I'm not heavily involved in, which is like you're talking about kind of like the credit out parcel type retail centers or the net lease retail.
Right.
And I think, again, to my sort of narrow thinking that I just backed myself into strip centers because I couldn't figure certain things out of the larger box type stuff. It's not that I can't figure this out, but I think it's easy to see why people are going to these strip centers is because you've got rents at $20 and, it's a 7 cap or whatever it is. Like if a tenant goes out, like we were talking earlier, you just put another one in. That's kind of easy. But if you got Starbucks and AT&T and Aspen Dental, it's a credit deal like you're talking about. It's a new development. Rents could be $50 now.
Right.
If Starbucks goes out for $50, are you going to put a local coffee place in as if you get really lucky, like Foxtail or somebody's going to come in and lease it, maybe.
Right.
But just depends on where your location is. So that's kind of a sidebar to your question, but I think, the development side is, you've seen the net lease world is like completely inverted. Like the strip centers, we don't have a whole lot of property on the market now because of this interest rate thing we're talking about.
Right.
But you do have a lot of net lease on the market, and that's because the developers built a whole lot, and now there's a glut on the market, and interest rates are causing nobody to be able to make sense of these. So they're sitting on the market. But I think, I don't know, the developers, some of them seem to be continuing forward. And from a lot of these velocity developers, again, I'm not in the day-to-day to that, but I do have people who have told me like, okay, if we do 10 deals, 8 of them will basically kind of break even and pay the bills. 1 we may actually lose a little bit, and 1 will make a lot of money, a decent amount of money on. So I think I don't know if that's I don't think that's like the intended model now, but I think these developers, a lot of them still just have the money, and they kind of have to, they're sort of addicted to the churn by necessity.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to continue. It's slowing, which I think is good for, a lot of more product to not be coming out, but I think it is slowing. And then to your point, I think earlier when you're talking about, the greatest real estate has been picked over for 20 years.
Right.
So it's hard to find lots of new developments unless it's, like Atlanta's always growing outward.
Yeah.
You're going to find the next, whatever's beyond Cumming, and then beyond, Gainesville, and then beyond wherever that is, you're heading to like Brazelton, and then you're out, to South Carolina at some point. There's always a new development area somewhere, but
then you're in Charlotte.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny because, you're right. That so many of these development shops are built on volume and volume and volume. But for years, it seems like they were offloading a lot of that volume to the REITs and the institutional buyers who, with cost of capital, have slowed up. So I think if anything, the rates coming down maybe helps alleviate some of that glut that we were talking about. And then maybe just frees up some of that traction. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the net lease guys are more dependent on the interest rates directly because to get those properties all sold, and I think that'll be healthy for everybody.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up with you're the unanchored retail specialist. Like, where's it going? Is it here to stay? Or is this the next mattress store, yogurt, whatever craze?
Yeah, so I think, we haven't talked like a whole lot about this, but I think, the reason the strip centers are on the radar now is because you have institutional type capital pursuing them now. And a lot of it's not necessarily pure institutional money. There are a lot of raised funds that are significant raised funds that are buying these. So we're tracking about 20 to 25 of them, which is not really huge if you think about it. I mean, if in Kyle Stonis and Pierce Mason's world of the big box power centers, they've got well over 100 of these REITs and so forth that are in the larger space. But so we're seeing this kind of institutional capital go after these properties. But I think I would say it's definitely here to stay because. But it comes with an asterisk, right? Because these institutional type players are buying the nicer properties, and it's not necessarily the high end properties. It's the properties that are well located, that have good access and good visibility, which you think of as just like, okay, you're just spouting off like some general real estate words, but like if you really start looking around at strip centers. Like just drive, like Gwinnett County or Cobb County, suburban, Charlotte, anywhere. You'll see that a lot of these strip centers were built by people that just were trying to maximize square footage on a piece of land.
Sure.
And maybe it wasn't the best retail piece of land. So you got a building that's sideways to the road, or it's like it has an L-shaped space in the middle, like an L-shaped center. You've got that elbow space. It's impossible to lease. Then they'll put an out parcel in front because they have extra room, and then it kills the visibility for the back tenant. So I would say, at least 60% of the properties that I see have some sort of real estate intrinsic issue to it from a visibility or layout standpoint or access standpoint. So those are always going to be mom and pop owned.
Sure.
The Crow Holdings of the world, the Last Miles, the Shannon Walchecks, the South Coast of the world are not buying those centers,
right.
Unless they've got crazy heavy traffic. I think Center Square just bought a really nice one up in off of 141 towards Cumming that had some out parcel stuff kind of in front, but it was just so dynamic and busy that it worked. But I think to answer your question, I think it's here to stay because it's going to have longevity. Because if you lose a tenant, unless the economy goes bad, the economy goes bad, everybody has trouble, whether you're in office or apartments or industrial, whatever. But I think people are always going to need to go to strip centers. Occupancy around the country is 96% maybe now. Some areas 97% for unanchored retail. So it's that's partly a function of the economy that we're in. And that also includes, by the way, these centers that are poorly built and poorly laid out. Yeah. So even those are full now. But these nicer ones, they're always going to be full. I think you're always going to have demand for them. Your rents are going to go up and down, but I think you're always going to have tenants for it, whether it's credit or local or regional or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. It's funny. I've always said I can't wait for a tenant to build a prototype for that L space because they could come in at 50% rent.
Right.
Who
Right.
who can make sense of this and build their prototype around it and be like, I'll take that space that you've been trying to lease for 3 years, but I wanted it, 30% market, and then I want top billing on the sign or something like that. I don't know who it'll be. Probably a mattress store. I don't know, but well, cool. Well, I really appreciate it. Always enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, this has been fun. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah, we learned on it together today. So,
Yeah, appreciate it, Ward. This is great.
yeah, thanks a lot.
If you would like to contact Jeff, a link to his website can be found in the description. Thank you for listening to the Gumption Podcast with Ward Neely. If you are a commercial real estate developer or property owner in need of financing, then we can help you get better loan terms faster. Visit gumption.dev, that's gumption.dev, or email ward@gumption.dev. We look forward to hearing from you. See you next episode.